Before we unpack today's story, I want to take a brief moment just to offer a divine blessing for your day and for the entire week ahead of you. May you find profound peace, clear direction, and renewed strength in whatever challenges or triumphs you are facing right now. It is a true privilege to have you listening today.
Absolutely, yeah. We're really glad you're here.
Right. So let's get right into it. I want you to imagine a modern organization that is famous for its moral high ground, like maybe a renowned charity or a massive global humanitarian group.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Now imagine they get caught in a scandal so depraved, so objectively dark, that even a hardened underground crime syndicate looks at the headlines and says, whoa, that crosses a line. Like, we wouldn't even touch that.
Right, which is a pretty wild scenario to wrap your head around.
It really is. But that is the exact dynamic we are exploring today. We are looking at a stack of historical analysis and study notes from the Holman and NWA Bibles. And we're focusing entirely on one explosive piece of ancient text, 1 Corinthians chapter 5.
Oh, yeah. It is an intense chapter.
It really is. The mission for our deep dive today is to dissect this massive scandal that rocked an ancient Mediterranean community, analyze how their leadership responded, and, extract the incredibly relevant lessons this text holds for us right now, because it talks a lot about boundaries, accountability, and the painful necessity of tough love.
And we desperately need those lessons today, just as much as they did back then.
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this. The author of this letter, Paul, is writing to a young community in the city of Corinth, and he is just absolutely furious about a specific incident.
Yeah, the anger rolling off the ancient parchment is, it's palpable. To understand the intensity of this letter, we really have to grasp the sheer scale of the scandal.
Right, it wasn't just a minor disagreement.
Not at all. The early church in Corinth was dealing with a highly public, a very severe case of what the Greek text refers to as parneia.
And that's kind of a catch-all term, right?
Yeah. Exactly. It's a broad umbrella term used in the ancient Greco-Roman world to describe a wide variety of sexual immorality or illicit behavior. But Paul doesn't leave it vague at all.
No, he really doesn't. He spells it out.
He pinpoints the exact nature of the crisis. A man within this religious community was involved in an ongoing incestuous relationship with his stepmother.
Which, that violates virtually every ancient religious code we have on record.
Oh, completely.
If you look back at the Jewish laws in Leviticus, the boundaries around family relations are incredibly strict and explicit. It's a massive taboo.
Right. And the historical context makes this even more shocking when you look at the city of Corinth itself.
Yeah.
Because, Corinth was not some quiet, prudish, isolated little village.
Far from it, yeah.
It was a wildly wealthy, cosmopolitan port city. It was situated on a narrow isthmus, so it controlled two major seaports. That meant it was a massive hub of international trade, transient sailors, and just immense wealth.
It was essentially a party city.
Exactly. It was actually home to the massive temple of Aphrodite, the goddess of love, which historians note was famous for its legalized, ritualized prostitution.
Wow.
So the baseline culture of Corinth was essentially the ancient equivalent of Las Vegas mixed with Wall Street. Almost anything goes.
Right. A culture totally built around indulgence, wealth, and pushing the limits of physical pleasure, which is what makes the reaction of the surrounding city to this specific scandal so fascinating.
Right?
Because the pagan Roman culture, which the early Christians viewed as, completely lost and immoral, they were looking at this situation inside the church and literally gasping in horror.
Yeah, because under Roman law at the time, a man taking his father's wife was viewed as an abhorrent violation of the family structure.
It crossed a major line for them.
A huge line. The Roman societal framework relied heavily on the concept of the paterfamilias.
The head of the household, right?
Exactly. The absolute authority of the male head of the household. So undermining that by sleeping with your father's wife, well, it wasn't just a moral faux pas. It was a severe crime.
Like a capital offense.
Yes. It demanded harsh punishment, frequently resulting in banishment or complete exile from the city.
So the secular pagan neighbors are looking at this church, this group of people who are claiming to have a higher ethical calling, and they're realizing this group is actually tolerating behavior that would get a standard Roman citizen exiled.
Yeah, the irony is just staggering.
The community that is supposed to be setting the moral standard is suddenly operating below the baseline of the secular legal code. And, the most baffling part of the historical record isn't even just that the crime happened. Human beings make terrible choices in every era.
Sure, human nature doesn't change.
Right. But the truly shocking element is the church's reaction. You would assume they would be mortified.
You'd expect them to be doing massive damage control.
Exactly. Public apologies, deep shame, maybe hiding from the public eye. But instead, they were proud of it. They were actively boasting about this situation. I genuinely struggle to comprehend how any group of people arrives at a place where they are proud of harboring a capital crime.
Yeah, the psychological shift required for that kind of boasting is profound. The texts describe the Corinthians as being puffed up.
Puffed up. That's an interesting phrase.
It is. It translates a specific Greek word that paints a picture of being dangerously inflated with arrogance. They had developed this severely distorted philosophy regarding their own spiritual liberation.
Okay, so they thought they were enlightened or something.
Basically, yeah. In the wider Greek culture of the time, there was a creeping philosophical idea, a kind of early dualism, that completely separated the spirit from the physical body.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah, the belief was that the spirit is inherently good and eternal, while the physical body and the material world are just temporary and ultimately irrelevant.
So if your spirit is already saved or enlightened, it genuinely doesn't matter what you do with your physical body.
Exactly.
You could indulge in literally any physical act, and they believed it wouldn't tarnish your spiritual purity.
Right, they believed they had completely transcended the rules. They viewed moral restrictions as something for the unenlightened. So by tolerating this extreme incestuous relationship, the Corinthians were essentially flexing their spiritual muscles.
Wow. They were showing off.
They were saying, look how spiritually advanced and liberated we are. We are so full of grace that we can tolerate anything. They had equated extreme tolerance with supreme spiritual wisdom. They turned their lack of moral judgment into a literal badge of honor.
But I need to push back on Paul's reaction to this, though. If we look at the broader narrative of this specific faith tradition, the core message is supposedly about grace, right?
Sure, absolutely.
It's about turning the other cheek, offering unconditional love, forgiving someone 70 times 7. So why is Paul coming down like a hammer here? Why is he demanding they mourn and take harsh, punitive action instead of demonstrating that famous grace and just, forgiving the man?
Well, what's fascinating here is that the tension you are highlighting is the crux of the entire chapter. Paul is drawing a razor-sharp distinction between individual grace and communal integrity.
Okay, so treating the individual differently than the community standard.
Yes, there is a massive fundamental difference between forgiving an individual who has stumbled, who recognizes their error and is seeking to change, versus institutionalizing and celebrating destructive behavior.
Oh, I see. Because the man wasn't sorry at all.
Right. This man wasn't repenting. He was living openly in this state, and the church was essentially throwing a parade to celebrate their own open-mindedness.
By refusing to address a glaring, highly public ethical breach in their ranks, the community wasn't just failing to discipline one individual, they were completely redefining the identity of their entire organization. When you endorse something by tolerating it, that tolerance just becomes your new cultural baseline.
And Paul understands that arrogance and moral compromise, they do not stay contained. They are active agents.
Nice spread.
Yes. And to illustrate this, he reaches for a metaphor that would have been instantly recognizable to every single person in the ancient world. He uses the imagery of baking bread to explain the mechanics of cultural contagion.
The whole yeast metaphor.
Right. He warns them that a little leaven, or yeast, leavens the whole batch of dough.
Which makes sense, but in our modern context, we just rip open a tiny foil packet of dry, inactive yeast from the grocery store. It feels very clinical.
Yeah, it's very sanitized today.
But ancient baking was a much more organic, visceral process, wasn't it?
Oh, totally. In the first century, you didn't buy yeast. When you baked bread, you deliberately held back a small piece of raw, fermented dough from the previous week's batch.
Like a sourdough starter.
Exactly like a starter. This leftover piece was sour, it was biologically highly active, and it was very pungent. When you were ready to make a new batch of bread, you would take that old fermented lump and knead it deep into a massive trough of fresh dough.
You really have to work it in there.
You couldn't just lay it on top. You had to work it into the very fabric of the new dough. And once it was in there, that little piece would rapidly spread its fermentation process through every single molecule of the fresh batch, causing the entire thing to rise and changing its fundamental chemistry.
It's an incredibly aggressive biological process. Once the yeast is in the dough, you cannot unmix it.
No, it's impossible.
So Paul is telling this community that their arrogant tolerance of this destructive behavior is that old, sour yeast. By leaving this man's unchecked behavior right in the center of their community, it is going to fundamentally alter the culture of the entire group.
And Paul ties this directly to their theological roots, specifically the Jewish festival of Passover.
Right, where yeast plays a huge role.
Yes. During Passover, families were required to meticulously scrub their homes and remove every single trace of yeast. It was a symbol of leaving their old lives of slavery in Egypt behind in haste, but it evolved into this powerful symbol of spiritual purity.
Getting rid of the old corruption.
Right. Paul tells the Corinthians that because Christ, who he refers to as the ultimate Passover lamb, has been sacrificed, this community is supposed to be a new, unleavened batch. They're supposed to represent a completely fresh start.
Well, you cannot claim to be a fresh, clean batch of dough if you are willfully kneading toxic, old fermentation back into the mix. I look at this ancient baking metaphor, and honestly, it instantly makes me think of how we handle home maintenance today.
Oh, really? How so?
It is exactly like discovering a tiny patch of toxic black mold behind the drywall in your living room. You might look at it and rationalize, like, well, it's just in that one bottom corner. It's totally contained. I'll just push a bookshelf in front of it, practice some tolerance, and ignore it.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Exactly. But quietly, invisibly, that mold is releasing spores into the HVAC system. Every time the air conditioning kicks on, it is blowing those spores into the kitchen, the bedrooms, the lungs of everyone in the house.
Yeah, it's spreading everywhere.
It is quietly rotting the structural integrity of the wooden studs. And eventually, the entire environment becomes completely toxic to breathe, all because you tolerated a small patch in the corner.
The biological reality of the mold perfectly mirrors Paul's warning. The Corinthians honestly believed they had isolated the issue. They thought their quote-unquote tolerance was a localized phenomenon.
They thought it wouldn't affect the rest of them.
Right. But Paul is arguing that their tolerance is the very mechanism spreading the spores through the vents. The specific sin of the man is terrible, sure, but the arrogance of the community's tolerance is the real contagion threatening to destroy the whole house.
And if toxic mold is threatening to collapse the entire house, a severe, drastic intervention is required. You can't just slap a coat of fresh paint over the drywall.
No, that won't do anything.
You have to take a sledgehammer, tear out the infected wood, and remove the hazard completely. Which brings us directly to Paul's verdict on how they need to handle this man. Reading through the historical texts, his instructions are jarring. They are incredibly intense.
Yeah, it is widely considered one of the most severe and uncompromising verdicts in all of Paul's surviving correspondence.
He doesn't pull any punches.
He doesn't. He writes with absolute apostolic authority, claiming to be present in spirit despite being physically miles away across the Mediterranean. He issues a direct order for the church to assemble, to formally expel this man from their community, and this is the heavy part, to hand him over to Satan for the destruction of the flesh.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. To a modern ear, the phrase handing someone over to Satan, it sounds like a medieval hex.
That sounds terrifying.
It sounds like something right out of a witch trial. It feels like the complete antithesis of a loving, grace-filled community. How does casting someone out to a demonic entity align with a message of salvation or care?
I get that, but it is a deeply misunderstood theological concept. When Paul commands them to deliver him to Satan, he's laying out the framework for formal excommunication. But we have to understand the jurisdictional worldview of the early church to make sense of the language.
Jurisdictional. What do you mean by that?
Well, in their theology, the gathered community of believers was a designated sanctuary. It was a realm of spiritual protection, grace, and divine light operating under the authority of Christ. Outside the walls of that community was the world. And the secular world, with all its imperial power, idolatry, and unchecked carnal desires, was viewed as the explicit domain of Satan.
Okay, so he isn't casting a supernatural curse on the man. He is just declaring a change of address. He's saying, remove him from the sanctuary.
Yes, he is instructing the church to put this man outside the spiritual safety net and thrust him back into the secular world he so clearly wants to emulate anyway.
Right.
But the most crucial element of this entire command is the purpose behind it. This action is not driven by vindictive punishment. It is not about destroying the man because they hate him.
It's not just kicking him when he's down.
No, it is a calculated act of restorative discipline.
Okay, but how does the phrase destruction of the flesh fit into a restorative plan? Because that sounds pretty final.
Well, the flesh in Paul's writings rarely means the literal physical skin and bones. It is a theological shorthand for a person's carnal desires, their arrogant rebellion, and their destructive, sinful lifestyle.
Oh, I see.
The ultimate goal of throwing this man out into the harsh reality of the secular world is so that his destructive lifestyle will eventually collapse in on itself. The destruction of the flesh is the death of his arrogance. The text explicitly states the end goal, so that his spirit may ultimately be saved on the day of the Lord.
Wow. So the ultimate goal, even in this incredibly harsh discipline, is still his salvation. It is a desperate, severe intervention meant to violently wake him up from his delusion.
Yeah, it requires us to completely reevaluate what love looks like in practice.
It really does. And, it makes complete practical sense if we apply this to a modern crisis, like an intervention for a severe, life-threatening addiction.
That's a great comparison.
Imagine a scenario where a family member is spiraling into a devastating substance abuse problem. They are lying, manipulating, and actively stealing from their parents to fund their addiction. For a long time, the family might practice what they think is tolerance or love, right?
So they enable them.
They keep paying the person's rent, they bail them out of jail when they get arrested, they keep inviting them to family dinners, and they actively pretend everything is normal.
Because the family is terrified of the conflict, and they genuinely believe that maintaining the relationship at all costs is the loving thing to do.
Right. But eventually, a professional interventionist will sit that family down and tell them a very hard truth. They'll say, you aren't loving them, you are enabling them to death, you have to cut them off.
Yeah, it's brutal but necessary.
It is the ultimate manifestation of tough love. The parents have to cut off the financial support, change the locks on the house, and completely remove the safety net. You do not do that to destroy your child. You do it so they are forced to experience the harsh, painful reality of their own actions. Right. You remove the padding so they hit absolute rock bottom with the desperate hope that the pain of the concrete will finally make them willing to seek real help.
That's exactly it. And Paul is acting as the interventionist for the Corinthian church. By allowing this man to stay comfortable, celebrated, and protected within the church while living in extreme rebellion, the Corinthians were acting exactly like that enabling family.
They were shielding him from the consequences.
They were continuously padding his rock bottom. Paul is ordering them to remove the padding, let him hit the concrete of his own choices, because that pain is the only mechanism left that might wake his spirit up and save his life.
It completely disrupts our modern, highly individualized, and let's be honest, often very soft concept of love.
It really does.
Sometimes the most deeply loving action a community can take is to categorically refuse to participate in someone's self-destruction, even if that refusal feels incredibly harsh and judgmental in the moment. However, implementing that kind of boundary carries a huge risk for the community itself.
Oh, absolutely.
Because when an organization starts talking about expelling people and drawing hard, moral lines in the sand, it is incredibly easy for that group to become paranoid, isolated, and highly judgmental of everyone they interact with.
And Paul anticipates that exact danger. He knows human nature, and he knows that a community hyper-focused on purity can easily turn into a secluded cult.
Yeah, they could just shut the doors to everyone.
So toward the end of the chapter, he takes a very deliberate moment to clarify a misunderstanding from a previous letter he had sent them. In that prior correspondence, he had instructed them not to associate with sexually immoral people, greedy people, swindlers, or idolaters.
Which, taken at face value, sounds like a blanket command to avoid everyone who isn't perfect. You can easily imagine this church deciding to build a walled compound out in the desert and refusing to ever speak to a non-believer again.
Right, but he explicitly corrects that assumption. He states clearly that he does not mean the people of the secular world. He actually uses a bit of pragmatic ancient sarcasm, noting that if they were actually going to avoid all the immoral people in the surrounding Roman culture, they would literally have to leave the planet.
Like, I'm not telling you to build a spaceship and move to Mars, guys. It's a very grounded reality check.
It is. He recognizes that the world outside the church operates by an entirely different set of rules. You cannot expect pagan Roman citizens who worship Aphrodite and operate in a cutthroat mercantile economy to act like devoted followers of Christ.
Because they never signed up for that.
Exactly. They haven't opted into that ethical framework. Therefore, his command not to associate is surgically targeted.
Yeah.
It applies strictly to anyone who calls themselves a brother or sister, anyone who claims to be a part of the spiritual family, but who actively lives in unrepentant, destructive rebellion against the family's core values.
So hold them to the standard they claim to believe. And he gives a very specific, practical instruction regarding how to handle these hypocritical insiders. He says, not even to eat with such a person. I want to dig into that because today, grabbing a coffee or a quick lunch with someone doesn't carry much moral weight. We eat with people we disagree with all the time in business or social settings. So why is the act of eating such a massive dividing line for Paul?
Well, we have to strip away our modern fast food mentality and look at the cultural weight of a meal in the ancient Near East and the Greco-Roman world. Sharing a meal wasn't just about acquiring calories.
It wasn't just a drive-through.
No, not at all. Meals, particularly the symposium or formal dinners in a Roman triclinium, were profound, intimate events. They were public declarations of fellowship, unity, and shared identity. To recline at a table and break bread with someone for hours was to publicly signal your connivance.
It was an endorsement?
Exactly. It was a way of broadcasting to the rest of the city, I endorse this person's life, I accept them as my equal, and we stand in solidarity.
Wow. So by casually eating with this man, the members of the church were physically acting out their endorsement of his incestuous relationship. They were giving him the cover of their reputation.
Right. So Paul is drawing a hard line on their social currency. He is commanding them not to lend the profound endorsement of their fellowship to someone who is actively mocking the foundational ethics their community is built upon.
That makes total sense.
You can still love them from a distance, but you cannot give them a seat at the table of honor.
So what does this all mean for us today? As I look at the architecture of this ancient text, it feels incredibly, almost painfully relevant to our current cultural moment.
Oh, without a doubt.
We live in an era where groups, whether they are religious circles, political factions, or corporate cultures, spend massive amounts of energy aggressively policing the behavior of the outside world. We see endless outrage directed at people who don't even claim to share the group's values.
We see it every day online.
Constantly. Yet simultaneously, those same groups will turn a blind eye to massive ethical failures, corruption, and abuse inside their own ranks, usually in the name of loyalty or protecting the brand. This ancient text is demanding the exact opposite approach. It is telling organizations, aggressively police your own house and leave the judgment of the outside world alone.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, that is the ultimate jurisdictional thesis of Paul's argument. The text establishes a clear boundary of accountability. The church is explicitly instructed to judge those inside its own walls, holding them to the high standard they freely claim to adopt.
Right.
Meanwhile, God is the one who judges those outside. It is a complete waste of energy, and frankly hypocritical, to hold the secular world to a religious or ethical standard they never agreed to follow.
It is about taking total responsibility for your own community's integrity first. You clean up the mold in your own living room before you start yelling at your neighbor about their lawn.
Exactly. And Paul concludes this entire masterclass in organizational boundaries by reaching back into centuries of Jewish tradition. He quotes an ancient law from the book of Deuteronomy stating, "Expel the wicked person from among you."
Cut out the rot.
Yes. The absolute priority is preserving the community's structural integrity. If the community rots from the inside out because it tolerated arrogance and sin, it loses its ability to be a light to the world. It just becomes another corrupt, hypocritical institution.
This text really is a timeless blueprint for organizational psychology and boundary setting, written thousands of years before those terms even existed.
Pretty amazing.
Let's bring all of this together for you listening right now. We've explored a deeply shocking historical scandal in an ancient, wealthy port city. We've unpacked the insidious, creeping nature of tolerated arrogance, that old, active yeast that silently ferments and rots a culture from the inside out.
Right.
And we've looked at the incredibly difficult, emotionally taxing, but absolutely necessary application of hard boundaries and tough love to protect the soul of a community.
It strips away our comfortable illusions and forces us to rethink what true tolerance and genuine love actually require of us in the real world.
It absolutely does. And I want to address you directly as we wrap up. Take a moment to think about your own life. Look at your workplace, your close friend groups, or any communities you invest your time in. Are there areas where a false sense of tolerance or simply a desperate desire to avoid conflict is allowing toxic yeast to spread?
That's a hard question to ask yourself.
It is. Are you ignoring the black mold in the walls of your own life because dealing with it feels too confrontational?
And as you consider those boundaries, I want to leave you with one final, perhaps unsettling thought to mull over. When we refuse to set a hard boundary with someone's destructive behavior out of a desire to, quote-unquote, be nice, we have to ask ourselves, are we actually denying them the very rock bottom they might desperately need in order to truly change?
That is a profound and heavy question to carry with you into the rest of your day. The yeast is always working, whether we acknowledge it or not. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive through the complexities of ancient Corinth. As always, God blesses all the listeners. May you have a wonderful week. Take care of yourself, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.